Um, but it's definitely a cold day out. I think we're done. I think we've seen the worst of the snow for now. So we really have our fingers crossed that tomorrow we will be able to be headed to Georgetown. But again, we will give you all those updates as we receive them. Tonight we will send out a informational email and also post any updates to the website and to our chat. If you are not already on the IRC channel, please make sure you do that. It's hashtag DC Blockchain. That is where we will be able to respond to any of your questions. We do not right now have the capability, I don't believe, on the YouTube channel to answer questions that way. So please make sure that you're watching via YouTube and you're asking all of your questions through the IRC channel. As I reported earlier, we did have a really great turnout so far. We have about 35 folks downstairs all working on their projects for that 7 a.m. submission deadline tomorrow. Just to clear up some logistics, again, we have questions back and forth, and I'm not sure who was able to join earlier to listen to them, but the deadline is 7 a.m. Open licenses include Apache, MIT, Common, thank you, Creative Commons. So we're not limiting it to MIT license that I think was previously on our website. Please make sure that you go to the Code-A-Thon website for any questions. We do have a Q&A page there. We also have some information about the speakers that spoke today. We had John Jacobs from Georgetown, Steve Posnack from ONC. We had Acting National Coordinator Jonathan White, and then we had Perry Ann Borning come to kick off the Code-A-Thon. She's the founder and the president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. So it was a very exciting morning. We just about wrapped up with our vendors. We do have one more for office hours, but I want to say thank you to all of those who have presented earlier. Teams, I think, have their second wind now that we've been able to feed them. There's an endless supply of coffee downstairs. I myself just had a delicious cookie, so I'm happy. And I think really people are just excited for this event. I know I am, and I think folks in the room, although I'm not down there with them at the moment, I will try later on to get a video from my phone and upload it so that you guys can kind of see what's been going on throughout the day. But I'm going to turn it over now to Hashed Health. We have Corey Totoro, who will be presenting for Hashed Health. And he will be our final vendor. Oh, I'm sorry. We have Microsoft after Hashed Health. And then we will have some Q&A. And again, I'm telling you one more time, IRC channel, hashtag DC Blockchain. And that is where we will address all of your questions. So, Corey? Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'd like to thank the Digital Chamber and all the co-sponsors of the Code-A-Thon. We're very excited to be here. My name's Corey Todaro. I'm COO of Hashed Health, a healthcare consortium for blockchain solutions for the healthcare industry. Jonathan's giving me some, it's like being on the news. This is fabulous. So my presentation will be a little bit different from some of the others. It's not technical in focus, but rather it's business and regulatory in focus, which we believe, and certainly in our experience at Hashed Health, is very important from the very beginning of POC design around blockchain solutions in the healthcare industry. It's very easy to step across the line in a highly regulated industry such as healthcare, and I'm going to highlight some of the large regulations that govern the movement of data and the movement of dollars between entities in this arena. And I also want to explore some of the business and governance considerations that go into POC design, not only from the purely technical aspect of what the POC accomplishes, but how we envision proof of concepts will be integrated into existing ecosystems of legacy technology and legacy players. If our hope is to enable patients and providers to conduct healthcare in a fundamentally new way, we have to understand the appetite for change. We have to understand how value is calculated for our blockchain solutions, and that's not purely a technical value calculation of what the technology is able to accomplish. And to that end, I'll offer some examples from my own background. So I come out of the healthcare industry primarily. I worked for a large health system. I also did venture capital investment in HIT for a number of years. I can't tell you the number of dead bodies, if you were, of companies who have attempted to do private or personal health records going back to as early as 2005. A lot of people have attempted to run at this solution with a variety of different configurations. And often it's not the technology alone that determines the success or failure of any given solution. Often it's about timing. Often it's about the way they're trying to or attempting to integrate with the current players in the healthcare space. And it's often trying to chase that elusive goal of the consumerization of healthcare. So that's a long held goal by a lot of players within healthcare, and it's proved a very difficult issue to crack. So it's not an issue of the will to Uberize healthcare, if you will. It's much more of a complex problem and one that really demands our attention. For the teams who are currently designing for the Code-A-Thon, I'd like you to think about these business applications, these business issues that arise when we think about POCs. So I'll start off with a very brief review of regulations, and the one that everybody will immediately go to is HIPAA. And HIPAA regulations around privacy of PHI. So I liken PHI to a radioactive substance. It's highly dangerous, and if you're lucky enough to be one of those covered entities who are responsible for storing and safekeeping this data, you treat it like you do radioactive waste in essence. And I'm speaking on behalf of all the compliance officers out there who will be confronted with new blockchain designs on ways to move PHI. And I can hear the compliance officers in my head right now telling me to get out of their office because there's no way they would put their enterprises at risk or give their enterprises that level of exposure to move PHI in a new and fundamentally untested way. HIPAA requires that covered entities take steps to encrypt the data, to securely store the data, to authorize access and movement of that data, to collect audit data on who's accessing that PHI, and the penalties, of course, can be quite severe, even for accidental exposures of PHI. So the prototypical examples that we all read about in the news are an unencrypted laptop left in a car, or taken home, and a teenager pops on the laptop and sees a file and posts it to Facebook. That can go anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 per violation per individuals who PHI has been exposed. So this gives us an understanding that healthcare enterprises are severely and extremely risk averse when it comes to PHI, and asking them to engage or to participate in a new technical architecture which moves this into a distributed system in which no one really has ownership or control is a tall order. And that's why a lot of the PHI solutions, a lot of the patient medical record solutions are focused on the patient. Because once released to the patient, PHI, of course, becomes non-covered. The patient themselves and any vendor they give their PHI to is not a covered entity. And thus we see a lot of ideas around how we can incent the patient, how we can create an ecosystem for the patient to control their own PHI outside of the highly regulated cover entities there. That's wonderful. It only gets you so far, though, because we still need to integrate with those covered entities who are the current holders and stewards of that identifiable health information. And we have to make them comfortable enough to want to integrate their legacy systems, their clinical data stores and otherwise, into these distributed transactional layers of blockchains or distributed ledgers. Absent that comfort level, I can easily see enterprises refusing to do so. And the current law requires a covered entity to give digital access to a health record, but it does not specify the form or method. So I can see a lot of enterprises going to the lowest common denominator of meeting the standards of giving access in a digital format to a patient while refusing necessarily to hook up their clinical data stores to integrate them via API or otherwise onto these distributed platforms. So I won't beat the dead horse of HIPAA too much more, but I do want to talk about two other important set of regulations that a lot of people don't think about, and that's the anti-kickback legislation and the Stark regulations, which govern who can pay whom within healthcare and for a variety of reasons. So health systems or health providers paying other health providers or providing them with value can be construed as a kickback in order to influence referral behavior for patient flow. So the ability for a health system to incent physicians to behave in a certain way on a blockchain by giving them something of value, be that actual currency or a token, can be highly scrutinized and presents exposure for health providers under anti-kickback and Stark regulations. And we want to be sensitive to the way that we incent behavior in these new distributed ecosystems so that we don't become afoul of these anti-kickback and Stark regulations. As well, it's illegal for a provider to refer to an entity or a designated health service if that provider or one of their family members has a financial interest in the provider of that designated health service. So that's called the self-referral restrictions or the self-referral regulations. And again, we want to be careful how we design incentive mechanisms around blockchain participation, the exchange of tokens, the exchange of coupons, the exchange of anything of value between providers or from a provider to an entity in which they have some sort of ownership or financial interest. And finally, it is illegal for providers to incent patients to do a variety of things if that incentive is in the form of a payment. That can be construed as the attempt to induce the patient to use their services instead of another provider's. And again, especially if it's a Medicaid or a Medicare patient, is highly regulated. So we want to be careful in the way we incent behavior, especially if that incentive involves money or anything of value between providers or between a provider and a patient. Curiously there, the health plan is perhaps the best source of incentive because they can provide incentives in a variety of different ways. They're not necessarily restricted in the same way that providers are regulated in their interactions with each other. So HIPAA, of course, anti-kickback and Stark, and the patient inducement regulations we think are important as we come to understanding the fundamental design of our proof of concepts. Hashed Health has worked on some proof of concepts. We've recently completed one on provider data management between health plans. And I can tell you quite honestly, the reason we picked this one as a sort of a first proof of concept test case is that the data that we were exchanging was, first, non-competitive between those business entities, and two, it wasn't regulated data. Giving us the ability to sort of stretch out and test out ideas and applications in blockchains without having to confront, at least immediately, those highly regulated flows of data or money, be they PHI or financial incentives between providers and patients there. The second topic I really want to look at is the business governance and the business incentive to participate in proof of concepts. So we've talked to well in excess of 150 healthcare enterprises, from pharmaceutical manufacturers and wholesale distributors, retail and chain pharmacy groups, health systems and health plans, and the entire ecosystem of sort of digital middlemen who help these value chains operate. And a question that we're starting to get more and more is, what's the value of a blockchain solution over and above what I can do with non-blockchain technology? And I think we understand that there are fundamentally some things that we can do on a blockchain, which can be done with existing database technology and cloud infrastructure. And they want to know, what are they getting out of it that they can't get through status quo applications? That's not only a technical question about what separates blockchain or unique blockchain use cases from non-blockchain use cases, but it's also a question about whether or not it's worth the investment to build a blockchain solution given past levels of investment in current technology stack. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Track and trace in pharmaceutical is a very hot topic for blockchain right now. The ability to track any sort of high-value asset across multiple intermediaries in a supply chain to guarantee provenance, to prevent the introduction of counterfeit items into the supply chain is certainly a high-value outcome. It's certainly doable without a blockchain, and we've seen the large distributors, and the big three, there's a big three for everything, but the big three pharmaceutical distributors have technical solutions to track, be they 2D barcodes or risk monitors, wrist-worn monitors to scan shipments as they come through. If they've invested in excess of $50 million over the past 5 years in this technology, a blockchain POC is of a low value to them, independent of its technical abilities or the solutions that it could possibly enable. And so that value question is becoming very important for us as an industry to answer for enterprises in healthcare and in other industries as well. We're also coming to the realization that the interest in blockchain will vary depending upon those kinds of levels of past investment in the technology stack. So when we go to design a POC, we have to have in mind who are the potential customers, who are the potential transacting parties across this blockchain. What technology stacks do they currently have? What has their level of investment been in the recent past into those technology stacks? And what's their appetite for new styles of technology or new technical architecture to reach either whole new solutions or solutions that are very similar to the ones that they're pursuing now? And we're also coming to an understanding of how different companies, whether they be at the top of their enterprises or lower in the industry ranking, how companies might look to blockchain as a competitive advantage over some of the larger incumbents who might refuse to invest in blockchain. And we're also trying to come to an understanding of how the regulatory regime in the United States and elsewhere can influence a willingness or appetite for blockchain solutions there. What all of these point to is an essential step that we need to take as we design proof of concepts and as we start to develop them. And that's something that Hashed Health is calling the minimally viable network. When we come to POC design, Hashed Health wants to convene a work group. At that table, we need a minimally viable network of transacting parties to design the proof of concept and to be the first users of that proof of concept to test out its value. I think we've seen over the past couple of years in blockchain investment and blockchain development, especially on the financial services side, you'll see press releases announcing large bank partners with blockchain developer X to develop proof of concept Y. That bank developing a proof of concept on their own and internally gives them internal education, but often we see those proof of concepts shelved. If we want to take proof of concepts to the next stage of piloting and looking forward to commercialization, then we need to test these proof of concepts with the network participants that we envision using this proof of concept as it goes towards commercialization. So we think a crucial part of POC design is to identify who those minimally viable network participants are. So for example, if we're looking at something like provider data management for directory services within a health plan, we would want multiple health plans in a given market represented in that proof of concept as part of the minimally viable network. We would also want a representative sample of physician groups or practices, large or small, within a defined geographical scope, who could participate in sharing updates of their provider data and making those updates available to the various plans. In essence, we need a sandbox of actual participants. And through that sandbox, we'll learn some valuable lessons. We'll learn the hard lessons of integrating in with legacy stacks. So as we design our proof of concepts, we envision that we'll be able to integrate with a variety of clinical EHRs or automated claims data systems or directory management systems or content management systems and presence in these enterprises currently. I think we'll learn the hard lessons of what it actually takes to integrate these kinds of solutions with those existing stacks. And we'll also learn about emergent network behavior as we see actual networks transacting partners operate across these shared ledgers, these shared transactional networks. And I think a lot of those lessons will surprise us, none of which would arise if we built those proof of concepts in isolation with a single enterprise. So as we think about putting together these POCs, we have to identify not only who we would like to have at the table as part of that minimally viable network, but we also have to understand their motivations and their willingness to do so. And a great example of this is revenue cycle management, which I think everyone thinks, and I agree, would be a wonderful solution on a blockchain. I think blockchain could introduce a lot of efficiency in the processing of medical claims, but we have to understand the incentives for all the players across the revenue cycle chain there, and they're not always aligned with improving efficiency in the payment and the speed of healthcare claims. Understanding that, if we come to that fact that some players simply would not be interested in improving efficiencies of these solutions, then we have to be able to identify who would be willing to do so. And it may be smaller payers, it may be regional payers, it may be self-insured employers instead of large health plans, and then we might look to pivot and identify either large self-insured employers or third-party management TPAs to engage with around these types of solutions so that we can prove value of the proof of concept rather than taking an approach of build it and they will come. And that's what I want to end on here, which there's a lot of excitement around blockchain solutions. And as fundamentally as a network play, there's the strategy of if we build it, then everyone will come on board. And I think that would be a tragic mistake for healthcare and for a lot of industries to pursue around proof of concept design. I think you can see lots of examples of they've built it and no one came to the party. And the first example I'll mention here is around self-sovereign patient data, which I personally and Hashed Health is a large believer in the value of. However, we're very concerned about the building of patient-controlled wallets and how they integrate into the ecosystem of healthcare currently. I could have a self-sovereign health record right now. I could do a non-blockchain PHR, of which there are many, but the willingness or unwillingness of healthcare providers to integrate with those solutions will be the make or break of that solution, independent of its technical sophistication otherwise. So bringing those parties to the table to co-design these proof of concepts with us will not only ensure their participation, but we think ensure the long-term success of blockchain proof of concepts as we begin to introduce it into this industry. The last point I want to make is around some of what we think will be the initial use cases or the initial proof of concepts. And I think there'll be two. On the one hand, we'll think there'll be a lot of B2B back-end solutions. And I know that there are a lot of co-vendors here who are working on similar solutions. And I've got to say, these are unsexy blockchain solutions. They're not like our cryptocurrency friends who want to reimagine the way we transact every day. These solve very practical technical business problems for existing enterprises in healthcare. But these are important proof of concepts to work on. That's because we're introducing a new technical architecture to this industry. We're giving them experience in how it's designed and how it operates and how they interact across a distributed node network to do these transactions. And we're laying down the very first tracks in what we think can be a multi-value blockchain. So take, for instance, track and trace in the pharmaceutical industry. It's a pretty simple supply chain solution and one that's not unlike non-blockchain supply chain solutions there. But we think it's important because it's the first step in layering on additional features which that track and trace data on a blockchain could feed. And that can give rise to solutions like contract and financial management around complex multi-party contracts in healthcare. So if we think about the contracts between pharmaceutical manufacturers, wholesale distributors, and retail pharmacies, a lot of the data that they have to manage to determine whether or not contracts are being fulfilled and whether or not certain levels in those contracts are being reached for issues like volume-based discounts or prompt pay discounts or formulary rebates, all that data is really encoded in the movement of items across the supply chain. So if we're tracking supply chain for regulatory purposes, that data could also be fed into smart contracts or other data systems which can assess the state or plateau levels of contracts. And then we can even look to automate the financial interactions between these parties on top of those kinds of ledger records. So we think there are multiple layers of value that we can begin to build on top of what I'm calling these B2B back office plays. The second large area of POC areas that we're looking at are, of course, the consumer-centric ones. And these are, of course, the more exciting. I think they grab a lot more headline space than some of the back office ones. And I think they have the most potential to fundamentally alter the way healthcare is delivered, paid for, and experienced in the United States and elsewhere. I think they're a lot more difficult to implement because it's not, in these cases, it really is about gaining buy-in from these existing enterprises, these legacy players, and we have to find ways to incent them. And I can tell you from their perspective, they want to understand the value. They want to understand how to minimize any sort of legal or other exposure that would be created by moving data in a fundamentally new way. And this gets into some very simple, mundane kinds of agreements. So in healthcare, there are business associates agreements, which confer the HIPAA obligations from a covered provider to a business entity, an outside business entity who has a BAA agreement with a health system. When that BAA is over, there's often a clause in most BAA agreements that have the responsibility to return or destroy all data that was used in conjunction with this BAA agreement. I don't know how we're going to do that with an immutable blockchain where this data is living on the ledger potentially forever. These are some complex problems about the intersection between the existing legal structure for how healthcare business is performed in the status quo and some of the new issues being introduced by this distributed ledger technology. And that's why I think we need a lot of regulatory and legal advice as well to come to the table to help us design these proof of concepts. So as you work, hopefully throughout the night on what I hope to be some very technically impressive solutions, I'd like you to keep in mind who we're trying to bring to the table to use these proof of concepts. And what are their perspectives? What are their constraints in the way they conduct business? Because the way healthcare is done right now is for very good reasons. It's either to cover exposure, to meet regulations, to meet levels of business efficiency that are sufficient for the industry right now. And introducing change is often frightening to a lot of these enterprises, so we have to find ways to include them in a conversation around building this new distributed architecture together. So I'm happy to take any questions or move on. Great.
One of my preferences is to focus on patient-mediated exchange. And as you talk about the different regulations and you're talking about HIPAA and talking about the other two that you mentioned, one thing that you did miss is, it is easier that once the patient has their data, it's up to them what they do with their data. And HIPAA is no longer regulates that information. But at that point, that patient also becomes a consumer. And I think it's really important to the consumer protections and about vendors or third parties that are thinking about doing things on the blockchain need to be really clear about how they're going to use that data and to way to inform the consumer.
Yeah. That's an excellent point, and it goes back to when the mandate first came out to provide patients with digital records of their health records, and the question is where they're going to put it. And I'm sure Google would be happy to take it. I'm sure Facebook would be happy to take it. But patients, A, have to understand their own health record, and B, they have to understand who's going to hold their data for them, and what does that agreement look like. If it's the Facebook user agreement, that's going to be a bad option, I think, for a lot of patients and their health data. Who are these entities that are going to stand up to store health data outside of the highly regulated clinical data stores that operate within health systems? Are they going to be nonprofits? Are they going to be consumer protection agencies? Are they going to be new collectives, distributed, decentralized collectives of patients who are doing it on behalf of each other? All of these are possibilities, but we don't necessarily have any good exemplars, except perhaps the consumer protection industry in general, to look at to become stewards of public health data outside the confines of health systems.
So the question from the IRC, maybe this is actually directed at the guys from the USPS, but Tori, I think you can handle this, is how does the system handle the privacy considerations of having name and prescription information on a permanent ledger?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm happy to turn it over to them. How do we handle having PHI on a blockchain? And my first line answer would be don't. Don't put PHI on a blockchain. Side chaining, pointers, and a variety of different mechanisms. Encrypted pointers would be ideal. We saw some great examples of that earlier this afternoon. But any sort of immutable, in quotes, immutable distributed system is no place to store. And I think we all understand this. Blockchains are not data storage solutions. We need to understand how blockchains will interact with storage solutions, be they owned by the health system or be they owned outside of the health system. We have to understand those interactions, and we need to map them out. We need to be reasonably sure of those interactions to enable the movement of PHI. But I'll also, here we go.
Well, yeah, and just in relationship to the electronic postmark, if that was part of that question, I'm not sure if it was. None of the information in the payload is stored. It's immediately purged when the one-way hash is run against that payload that's sent to the EPM API. So we don't keep any of that. We create just that non-indicative one-way hash that allows that document to be revalidated in the future. But none of that content is kept at all. So I don't know if that's. Yeah. So again, in the blockchain, it would be something like a pointer. It would be a much more sensical way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the simple answer is don't. Don't do it.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So I can relate to that, right? You don't want to store data in the blockchain, but you kind of go back and get the data. But also, right, I'm new to the blockchain, so that's my disclaimer there. But also read that you can go and services or anything from a blockchain to an outside thing.
Hmm.
So what are the implementation um, mechanisms available to kind of hook to this other systems where you can go and get what you need
Right.
based on the hash stored?
Right. So how do we develop and encourage robust API ecosystems to interoperate with blockchains? And there are a number of people in the room here who represent companies who are working on these ecosystems now, and that's vital. But what I'm heartened by is that blockchain is only a couple of years old, at least in terms of industry application, and interoperability is already being heavily discussed and heavily worked on, which is something in healthcare I'm heartened by, because interoperability is sort of the last thing on people's minds after they spent $1 billion on an Epic implementation. It's like, oh, well, okay, now do we have this very expensive piece of that no one wants to touch anymore? Please don't even look at it. How do we make it interoperable with everything on the outside? And to that point, I hear this a lot from health systems. We're very interested in blockchain as long as it's outside our clinical IT department, because we've just spent $1 billion on Epic, and there's no appetite to go near it. Or to alter it in any way possible. So there's a lot of fatigue in healthcare IT around this. We need to find those entry points where there's a willingness and an appetite to do it. But to your point, those APIs are crucial, and I think we've got some excellent examples of that here. There's PocketDoc, there's MITRE, who presented before. I believe it was MITRE, the first office hour, which they're both introducing API ecosystems, so we can ping blockchains for the movement of quality data, for patient-reported outcomes or other sort of quality measures that are mandated by a variety of programs. We can also do it for eligibility checks. There's a lot of APIs around insurance eligibility, and in fact, the pharmaceutical space, I think, has the most robust APIs in existence currently. They can do eligibility checks right now. You can do prior auth checks and things like that. Pharmacies tend to move a lot more in real time than a lot of other health applications there. So there are not only existing APIs out there, there are emerging APIs in healthcare, of course, the FHIR standards and HL7, but there are a number of companies and players who are looking specifically at APIs for blockchain ecosystems. So that's where.
So we're going to transition back to Kate, and I'm just going to give the guys from USPS one more chance if you actually want to join the Zoom channel to actually go over your slides. We're going to be joining Microsoft for the half hour from 4 to 4:30, or from 4:30 to 5. You guys are welcome to finish your slides.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. We do have one more vendor coming up, which is Microsoft, in just a little bit. So again, for anyone who is just tuning in, welcome. This is Kate Ryan, bringing to you live our DC Blockchain and Healthcare Code-A-Thon. Again, this is a event sponsored by ONC and the Chamber of Digital Commerce. So far, we have about 35 participants that are downstairs coding right now. We also have several people that have joined us on the YouTube live stream and are chatting with us on our IRC channel. That IRC channel is hashtag DC Blockchain. That is our go-to point for all communications, all of your questions and answers. I think we're going to be wrapping up at about 5 o'clock. We do lose this room, and then we go downstairs where the teams are. So they're going to be staying through the night. We have not yet heard from Georgetown at the moment. It is 34 degrees. It is no longer snowing, but it's supposed to get down to 22. So besides the cherry blossoms probably losing all their buds, the roads will probably be icing over. We don't know what that means for campus. As soon as we hear from Georgetown and we know where we will be for the day, we will let everybody know. We will update the website. We will update you via email. We'll try to get something out on YouTube, but any forms of communications that we can, we'll absolutely do so. I do believe that ONC is also tweeting, so we'll be able to get communications out that way. I really just want to say one more time thank you so much to everyone who was able to come and be here in person today at the Marriott. I know a lot of flights were canceled, so thank you, thank you. For those of you who are tuning in at home, thank you so much for your interest and for your participation. This has really been a great event so far. We've had a few hiccups along the way, but I really think that this has been a fantastic event. We've been getting great feedback here. I hope all of you at home are enjoying what you're seeing. Please send your questions and your comments on that IRC channel. Again, hashtag DC Blockchain. With that, I think we're going to turn it over to Microsoft. I believe that they are on the line. So just give us a few minutes. It takes a little bit longer to go from this live stream here in-house over to the Zoom. So thank you so much for listening. Look out in your inboxes for any logistic updates. Thanks.